Building a Business Brain. Episode 4. Why cheap is not a strategy. When most people start a business, pricing feels personal. You make something. You offer a service. You know how much effort it takes. And then comes the uncomfortable part. Putting a number on it, that's where a lot of people panic. They worry that if the price is too high, no one will buy. They worry they haven't earned the right to charge more. They worry that charging fairly will make them look greedy, or unrealistic, or out of touch. So what do? They go low, they underprice, they discount too early. They treat affordability as the same thing as value. And then they build a business that looks busy on the outside, but slowly drains them from the inside. Because cheap is not a strategy. Cheap can get attention. Cheap can get a quick yes. Cheap can even get sales. But cheap by itself does not create a healthy business. Today I want to talk about pricing the way business owners actually need to understand it. Not just as a math problem, but as a signal, a structure, and a survival tool. Because if you don't understand pricing, you can work very hard and still build something that never truly supports you. Let's start with the first misconception. People think pricing is mainly about what something costs to produce. That matters, but that is not the whole story. If you sell a physical product, you may think about materials, shipping, packaging, platform fees, labor. If you sell a service, you may think about your time, your experience, your preparation, your tools, your overhead. All of that matters. But pricing is not just about cost. It is also about positioning. What are you telling the customer about this offer? Where does it sit in the market? What kind of buyer is it for? What expectations does it create? What kind of experience surrounds it? The price is not just a number. The price is part of the message. A very low price does not always make something more appealing. Sometimes it makes people doubt the quality. Sometimes it attracts customers who are not your best customers. Sometimes it creates high volume with low margin. Which sounds exciting until you realize you are exhausted and still not making real money. That's the trap. A lot of people confuse movement with momentum. They think, at least things are selling. But if the margins are too thin, if the client load is too high, if every sale takes too much out of you, then growth can actually make the problem worse. You are not building leverage. You are scaling strain. That is why pricing has to be tied to the kind of business you're trying to build. Do you want a business that depends on constant hustle? Do you want one that needs hundreds of low-ticket sales just to stay afloat? Do you want one where every customer expects more than they paid for? Do you want one where raising prices later feels impossible? Because you trained your audience to expect bargain rates? Or do you want a business with room to breathe? Pricing helps decide that. Now let's talk about one of the biggest emotional blocks around pricing. The fear of losing people. This fear is real. When you raise your prices, some people will say no. Some people will disappear. Some people will decide it is not for them. And that can feel personal, especially if your work comes from something meaningful. Pity, teaching, care, service. But here's the important shift. Not every no is a sign that your price is wrong. Sometimes it is simply a sign that you are not for everyone. And that is not failure. That is business. A business becomes stronger when it gets clearer. Clearer about who it serves. Clearer about what it offers. Clearer about the level of quality and experience it delivers. You do not need everyone to say yes. You need the right people to say yes, at a level that sustains the business. That's different. Pricing, in other words, is a filter. It helps shape your customer base. It influences expectations. It determines how much time and energy you can give to each sale. And it determines whether the business can grow without collapsing under its own weight. Now let's get practical. How should you actually think about pricing? Start with the floor. What is the minimum this offer must bring in for it to make sense? Not emotionally. Actually, what are the direct costs? What are the indirect costs? How much time does it take? What does it cost to acquire the customer? What platform or transaction fees are involved? How much goes to taxes? How much needs to remain as profit? That minimum matters, because if you price below sustainability, you are not being generous. You are subsidizing the business with your own energy, your own time, your own money. That may work briefly. It does not work forever. Then look at the market. But carefully. Competitors can offer clues, but they are not the final answer. Some businesses are underpricing badly. Some are using pricing as a loss leader. Some have different costs, different audiences, different goals, or outside income supporting their business. So yes, study the market, but don't worship it. Your price has to make sense for your model. Then think about perceived value. This is where many business owners get uncomfortable. They think value should be obvious. They think the customer should just understand. Usually they don't. Value often has to be communicated. How easy is the buying process? How polished is the presentation? How clearly do you explain the result? How trustworthy does the brand feel? How specific is the problem you solve? How confident are you in the offer? Value is not just what the product is. It is also how legible and desirable it feels to the customer. Two people can sell something very similar at very different prices. And one will consistently earn more because the offer is framed better, explained better, and delivered with more confidence. That does not mean fake luxury. It means clarity. Now let's talk about a mistake people make when they feel awkward charging more. They overload the offer. They keep adding extras. More features, more time, more bonuses. They think, if I charge more, I need to give more. Sometimes yes, but not endlessly. Often what the customer wants is not more stuff. They want a clearer outcome. They want less confusion. They want confidence that this is worth it. More is not always better. Better is better. Overstuffing an offer can make it feel messy, and it can quietly destroy your margins. A healthier question is this: what is the core transformation or experience I am providing? And what price reflects that honestly and sustainably? One more thing. Pricing is not permanent. A lot of people freeze because they think they must choose the perfect price. You don't. Pricing is something you test, evaluate, and refine. If nobody buys that is data. If people buy quickly and repeatedly with no hesitation, you may be too low. If customers love the offer but it still leaves you exhausted or resentful, you're probably too low. If sales are steady and delivery feels sustainable, you may be getting closer. Pricing is not something you guess once. It is something you learn, and learning requires paying attention. Watch conversion. Watch customer behavior. Watch profit. Watch your own capacity. Watch whether the business is becoming more stable or more chaotic. Now, there is one more thing I want to say, especially for small business owners, creatives, and people building something from the ground up. You are allowed to price for survival. You are allowed to price for growth. You are allowed to price for dignity. There is nothing noble about building a business that consumes you. There is nothing morally superior about being the cheapest option. And there is nothing shameful about wanting your work to support your life. That is the point. A real business has to hold itself up. It has to cover costs. It has to create margin. It has to leave room for mistakes, slower seasons, investment, and rest. Otherwise, what you have is not really a business. It is a burden with branding. So if pricing feels emotional, that makes sense. It touches worth, confidence, rejection, fear. But underneath all of that, pricing is also a structural decision. What kind of business are you building? One that people applaud because it is cheap, or one that can actually last? Because in business, the goal is not just to get sales. The goal is to build something sustainable. And sustainable businesses are not built on panic pricing. They are built on clear thinking. Not, what is the lowest number people will accept? But, what price supports the value of this offer and the future of this business? That is a business question. And learning to answer it is part of building a business brain. That was building a business brain. MBA Thinking Distilled.